Well, to kick off, Kevin, first off, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We've planned today to talk about culture and self compassion. But before we dive into some of those topics, first off, just to begin, the arc of your professional journey is fascinating. And so I was hoping we could start by diving into your story first. And so I know just to recount a little bit for those listening in, you were an engineering manager and engineering director for a while. And then you became the first managing director of LinkedIn Europe and the first employee for LinkedIn outside of the US. And now you're an executive coach. So can you bring us into a little bit about your journey from engineering leadership to executive coaching? Tell us a little bit more about your background there.
Yeah. So one, my trajectory wasn't a straight line, which I think most people have that, non-linear path. I'll start way back. In school, I hated school. I was dyslexic, did not do well in school. But senior year of high school, this was back in the 80s, right? So computers weren't so prevalent. A teacher asked me, he's like, you know what? I think you should take this programming class. And it was in basic, right? It was only one class. That was it. And it was obvious. And it was the first time that I had come across something from a school related topic that was obvious. It just felt like, doesn't everybody understand this? And so that led me to computer science degree. Then I worked at Compaq Computers in the early 90s. And this was when PCs were, the cutting edge. 486 processor had come out, and Compaq was really on that cutting edge. And so, from there we spun out AltaVista as a separate company from Compaq Computers, and I was part of that original team that was able to spin out AltaVista. And so I was engineering with Shopping.com, which was owned by AltaVista at the time, transferred over to Europe. And the funny thing is I went to Europe for 18 months to run engineering over there, stayed there for 13 years. So this is a, short-term step turned into something really big. And while I was at Alta Vista running international for engineering, then the opportunity came up to actually be the general manager for Alta Vista. And that was my big transition from engineering technology to running the business. And that was a giant leap forward. So it was still a very technical company. And then from there, I kind of ended up being the international guy. So from Alta Vista, ended up working with Sidestep, which is now Kayak, and started and ran international for them. And then when LinkedIn was expanding internationally, then in 2007, then there was a call for who's the leader. And so, by that time, it's like, oh, okay, this is the third time now starting or, running international. And so that was the arc for me, which was, technology, moving into general management, but was always with technology companies. And so I felt engineering and having that background, not just in engineering, but in product, it was a huge advantage because I always looked at, the business from the perspective of, what's our product? How are we actually creating this, and what's the technology behind it? Which I thought was helped me be a much better general manager for sure.
I have a dovetail question related to the engineering experience or the capacities you built in engineering leadership that equipped you for the international GM role. When you look back on that experience, were there specific experiences as an engineer or engineering leader, or the capacities that you built or the habits that you developed that equipped you for that jump?
It was problem solving. It was looking at, what's the real root of the problem, not just here's what we're experiencing, but it was really about tracing things back. And it was funny. I heard this from one of the people actually in an ELC conference, or not a conference, but in our ELC leadership groups. Then it stuck with me. He said, we're engineers, and sometimes we solve problems through code. And I was like, oh, I loved that, that statement. And so I think, the whole thing around focusing on what was a real problem we're trying to solve, it really helped me. And then being able to understand that not every problem is really easy to understand. And so we need to take, many different steps in order to get there. And that they're not always going to work out. So we have to deal with failure all along the way. So that was a big piece of it. But the other thing is, we would deal with very complex problems. And so, all the way back at Compact Computers, we were working with Intel and Microsoft quite closely. And so it was like, how do we work with multiple, not just organizations internally, but externally? And so that helped me really understand, a much wider scope of business, in that we can't just solve everything ourselves. We actually need other people to help solve, these bigger problems. And so, I took a lot of those lessons from engineering and product over to the business side.
I think that's really great because we have a lot of folks listening in from very different points of their career, and oftentimes folks are. And I know you'd mentioned the leadership group that you're a part of. I'm a part of a few other engineering leadership peer groups that we lead, and the big question oftentimes comes up is, how do I prepare myself for the next role, or what skills am I building now are going to transfer to something completely different, and sort of that existential question of what next comes up quite a bit. And so hearing your perspective and journey there is really helpful, I think, for folks in that space.